Hello and welcome to the video on Archiware P5 Synchronize. This video will take you through the Synchronize product and show you what it does, how to configure it, why you might want to use it, etc. So if you watch the earlier videos in the series, you'll have seen how to install the product and get to the point where we are now. So I'm going to log into the web interface as P5 demo and get up the main screen. So previously we've been configuring some backup storage and backup plans, and we've done some work with the archive product. So far Synchronize is unconfigured, so if we click on the Synchronize module at the top of the screen, we'll see that Synchronize requires clients, optional cloud storage, but cloud storage requires an additional module to be installed, so we'll look at that in a moment. And once you have your clients configured, you create a Synchronize plan via the Synchronize plan section here to actually describe the source and destination and the schedule of how you want to move data around. So before we get stuck into actually configuring the product, I'm going to do a bit of scribbling just to give you an overview of what Synchronize does and some of the different options that are available. So let's just have a little bit of a look at the Synchronize product. Synchronize. Synchronize, unlike the backup and archive products, is all about copying data or optionally moving data from one machine to another or between two locations on the same machine. So a typical setup environment might be that a local area network hosts two machines, number 1 and number 2, and let's say number 1 is the live server, and this is the live data that is being edited or whatever on a daily basis, and the second machine also has some storage on it, and this machine is the disaster recovery machine. So what we would want to do in this instance is replicate the data, the live data, to the DR storage down here going across the LAN. So this data is going to travel between these two machines, and this is the sort of task that Synchronize can accomplish for you. And what you would do is install Archiware P5 on here and nominate this as the server, and over here you would have P5 installed, and this would be the client machine. So this isn't the machine where the configuration takes place. All of the configuration is done up here on the top machine. What you would do is configure a sync plan where the source of the data is this RAID over here and the destination is this RAID over here, and then you would make a schedule to say every 2 hours maybe, locate any changes that have occurred up here and synchronize those down to here. So this means that if there's a failure up at the top on the live server, then you will have a copy of any data that you might have lost from that storage from within the last 2 hours. Or it might be that it's okay just to do a synchronize every day, and then you can treat the synchronize much like a backup, and you take a daily copy of your live data. Now you can also use this product to give you an offsite backup. So maybe you have a WAN link that's reasonably quick to a remote office up here, or a data center, or some kind of remote server that you've got control over. So again, you would have a third machine up here. This might just be the only machine that you're backing up to, and you've got some DR storage available up here, and so you could then be syncing your live data directly to this remote disk, and this gives you an off-site backup because this is a different site. And again, you would just configure the third machine up here as a client, and then add that client to your server, and then you'd be able to browse the storage on that client and choose it as the target for your sync plan. So Synchronize basically is moving or copying data between machines, and it can push data or pull data. So if I just clear some space here, so where you have two machines, number 1 and number 2, connected across a LAN or a wide area network, you can make a, given that this is the server and this is the client, you can make a sync plan which effectively pushes data from the server to the client. So the server, the local host machine, is going to be the source of the data, and the client number 2 is going to be the destination. Or you can reverse that, so you could have the source of the data as being client 2, the remote machine, and the recipient, the destination of that data, being the local host machine. So you can do it either way round, and you could have a sync plan that pushes data at 12 o'clock, and another sync plan 2 hours later that pulls data from the remote client. The other thing that Synchronize can do is retain previous file versions or snapshots of the file set that you're synchronizing. So let's just explain how that works. So let's imagine that we have this folder on our source machine that has a couple of files in it, maybe Photoshop files, and these are being synchronized to a folder on a destination machine over here. So this is the destination machine. So ordinarily when you synchronize for the first time against an empty folder, Archiware is going to determine that these two files don't exist over here, so they're going to get copied across. So all well and good. Now next time the synchronized plan runs, if nothing's changed, then nothing will be copied across, because each time the two folders are being compared. If one of these files over here is modified in some way, let's just say the one here with the plus sign on it, then when the synchronized plan runs, it will determine that file is different on the source to the destination, and so by default the file will be overwritten over here on the destination. There are two different modes of running the sync plan. One is called a mirror, and the other is called an update. Whether you're running a mirror or an update, we will always update the file set on the destination with any changes that occur on the source, but that will mean overwriting an old file with a newer file. The main difference between mirror and update occurs with regards to deletes. So if we were to then go and delete this file over here on the source folder, then the mirror type of sync always attempts to keep the destination identical to the source, and that includes performing deletes on the destination if necessary in order to keep the two things mirrored. So if we were doing a mirror sync, the next time that mirror sync ran, that would result in the same file being removed over on the destination machine. So that's how mirror synchronization works. Update syncs, however, behave differently. So with an update sync, if we were to remove that file on the left hand side over here, then the update sync would not remove that file on the destination, because update syncs do not perform deletes. So this file over here would remain even though the file had been deleted on the source. And you can use that feature to allow you to recover deleted files, because if this is your live data set and people are working on it during the day, while you're doing update syncs and not deleting on the destination, maybe you're doing hourly syncs during the day, the folder where the destination exists would give you the opportunity to go and find deleted files. While running update syncs, there's another feature that you can use, which is to create versions. So versions allow you to access previous versions of a file which has been changing. So if we replace this file, which we were talking about modifying earlier on the source, if we make a modification to it, then if we have versions enabled and we do an update sync, then rather than just replacing this file over here with the updated version of the file and therefore replacing and overwriting and removing the previous version of that file, what we do is we create a subdirectory in the folder, and we call that folder versions. And if I just extend my folder a little bit here so we can fit some more data in there. And within the versions folder, we will keep previous versions of the file. So what we'll do is we'll keep this file over here before it was modified in the versions folder without the plus sign on it. And then the updated version of that file will then be written into the main folder over here. So these versions folders will appear in any folder where changes are happening, and they will store previous versions of any file in the parent folder that's changed. So if this file over here was to also, let's just do it on the left hand side, if this file over here was also to receive some changes, then that file would be copied over here onto the right hand side, and the previous version of that file would also be stored in the versions folder. So this allows you to track multiple versions, because when you're collecting old versions on the destination, you can specify how many old versions you want to keep. So you might say I want to keep 5 old versions, and then Archiware will manage that and delete the 6th version as a new version arrives that becomes the 5th. So that's how versions works, and we'll be having a look at this in the actual web interface to see how it was set up. Now the thing that you can do with mirror syncs that's kind of similar to versions but not quite the same is that you can keep snapshots. So let's just go and delete a little bit of, make a bit of space here. So as explained earlier, when you do a mirror, Archiware attempts to keep the source and destination folders identical to each other. So if we delete the files that we've got at both ends so that we can start again. So let's say that we have two files over here, X and Y. And first time you run a mirror sync, those will be copied, so you'll get X and you'll get Y. But if you were to then delete both of these files over here, then next time the mirror sync runs, the same two files get deleted over here. So that's the default behavior without having cycles enabled. Let's just make this folder a bit smaller again so we've got room to explain what I'm about to show you next. So if you add cycles to the mirror synchronization, then what happens is this. Start off with two files, X and Y, and the first time it runs, those two files get copied over to your target directory. But within the target folder, we create another folder called cycles, much like we did with the versions. So this folder here is called cycles. And next time the synchronized plan runs, let's say we deleted the X file over here. So there's now just one file in our source folder. What we do is we take over in the cycles folder, we make another folder which has a timestamp on it. So I'm just going to write timestamp. And that timestamp will now be the time that the previous synchronized plan ran, because what we're going to do is we're going to take these two files over here and we're going to put them into this snapshotted folder. So we're going to say at that point in time there were two files, X and Y, existed in that folder. And then what we'll do is we'll update the destination folder and perform the mirror sync on it, so now make the two things the same again. But at the same time as having a mirror copy of the source folder, within the cycles folder you will see various different time-stamped folders, so there'll be several of these created, and each one will hold the status of that folder as it was at that time. So if we ran another sync, the next timestamp rather would just contain the file Y, and let's say we deleted the Y file at that point and ran the sync again, so that file would get deleted on the right hand side, but the previous state of that folder would be kept down here in this folder. So with cycles what you're doing is creating snapshots of the contents of the source folder over time, and again, as the same with versions, you nominate the number of cycles that you want to keep, and Archiware will manage that number of snapshots for you. Of course, if there were to be 1 terabyte of data in the source folder, then 1 terabyte of data would be copied over to the destination folder, and then once we start creating the snapshots, we would need 1 terabyte of space per snapshot, assuming that all of those files remained. So what happens with snapshots, with cycles, is that we use file system links. And the clever thing about file system links is that we don't need to use 1 terabyte of disk space per snapshot down here, because we actually link what look like regular files on the file system to the same blocks on the disk. So we don't need to use an additional chunk of space per cycle that we create. We're actually linking to the same space used on disk. And Archiware manages this whole process for you. So this means that you can store many different snapshots of your data on disk without needing the space required to store all of that separate data. Okay, and again we'll look at how snapshot cycles work when we go through the web interface in a moment. Okay, so let's kick off by describing and showing you how to set up a simple synchronized workflow. I'm going to treat the copy of P5 that we're running here as the source of my data in this example, and I have this Mac Mini server client which I configured in the clients video, so you can go back and watch that for some details of what that means. The Mac Mini server is another Mac on the LAN at this IP address, and I want to copy this folder I have on the desktop here, sample pictures folder, which has a bunch of small JPEGs and a movie in it, 345 items in total. And I want to take that folder and I want to copy it to the Mac Mini so that I've got a clone of that data. And I have access to the Mac Mini here via a network mount, so I can see there's a folder on this remote machine called Synchronize Destination, which is currently empty. And so my plan is to copy the sample pictures, the contents of that folder, into this folder, but set it up via Archiware P5 on a schedule so that this will get copied across according to a schedule that I create. So that could be every hour, every day, and so on. And then once we've got that running, we'll look at some of the different options, including tracking the different versions of files and keeping the different cycles, snapshots that's possible to do as well. So let's kick off by going down to my Synchronize plan, where I currently don't have any sync plans. And I'm going to click the new button to create my first plan. Let's give it a name, training, sync. And once we click apply, then we're able to specify the source, the destination here, and then create one or more schedules at the bottom that define how the data is actually synchronized to that machine. So source of data, I want that to be this sample pics folder. That's located on the localhost machine. So I'm going to leave this client menu on localhost, clicking the browse button, browsing to my home directory, and then desktop. I can now see my sample pics folder, so I'm going to select that as the source. And you can see at the top it's possible to have multiple directories specified as the source, while the destination is a single directory. So if you had 10 directories at the top, they're all going to be copied within the directory that you specify as the destination. But in our example, I'm just going to sync one folder. So while the destination could be on the local host as well, so I could create another folder on the desktop down here and sync from this folder down to this one. I'm going to choose the Mac Mini as the destination because that makes it a bit more interesting, and we're going to synchronize to users admin synchronize destination. So that's the same folder that you could see down here, which is currently empty. So we've got our source and destination specified. The next thing to do in order to be able to actually copy that data is to make a schedule, and currently there are none. So we click the new button, much like with a backup plan, to create the schedule. At the top you can see we get to pick between the mirror and the update sync modes as described in the diagrams that I was drawing a little earlier, and within each of these options you get the option to either keep snapshots or with update keep previous file versions. So I'm going to start out by doing an update, which in the first instance will do the same thing as a mirror. It will just copy those files across to the remote destination, and then we'll have a look at keeping file versions. The schedule, we basically set a start, an interval and an end time. So if you wanted to synchronize this data between 9 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock in the evening during working hours every 2 hours, then you could set that up there, and then you could say I want to do that either every day, every other day, or just on working days. So let's just choose Monday through Friday. And as with backup plans, it's possible to make an exception. So if there's some reason why on the first Monday of the month you don't want that sync plan to run, then you can make an exception there. The file filter, we don't currently have any defined, but file filters allow you to exclude files from this copy based on a template that you create. So that can include excluding file names based on the content of the file name, or the content of paths or folder names, or dates. So you can say don't synchronize anything that wasn't modified today, for example. And there'll be an advanced video where file filters will be shown and explained in detail. So I'm happy with this schedule. It's going to do an update of the destination, which is on the remote Mac, of the sample pictures folder, copy any changes, but it won't do any deletes on the target. And starting at 9 AM on weekdays through till 7 PM, it's going to sync every 2 hours. So it's going to run on a regular repeating basis. So I'm going to apply that plan. You'll notice at the top though that the auto start setting needs to be set to enabled in order for this job to run automatically. So there's a little toggle for that up there. So let's apply that change as well. And having done that, if we go to our job monitor window, we should now see that our training synchronize will run at 1300 hours. So 1 o'clock is the next interval where that job should be running. So we can either wait for 1 o'clock or we can start it manually, either by hitting the Start Now button in the job monitor, or there's also a Start Now button in the actual sync plan settings, which allows you to choose the schedule that you want to start. So either way it would have the same effect. I'm going to start the job from here, and then if we flick back to the job monitor window, we'll see that the job is running, and it's telling me how long it's been running for, how many items it's looked at, how much has been copied, and it looks like it's just about finished. Copied 10 megabytes worth of data, which should match the approximately what's seen in this folder here, which it does. So now you can see in this Finder window, which is pointing at this remote machine, that the JPEGs and the movie have all been copied across. So now if I go to my source folder over here and take the first couple of files and duplicate them, so if we take these two here and make a copy of them, so I've now got these two files here, and I go back to my sync plan. In fact, this time let's just go to the job monitor window and choose to start the job now. Then what will happen is the two folders will be compared again, and this time just the changed files should be copied across. So you can see now two files have been copied, and again if we look in our destination folder, you can see those two files that we created on the source have now been copied across. So let's close a few windows down. If we look to the schedule here, let's try keep previous file versions and see how that pans out. So if we apply that change, and now I'm going to go to my source folder, and this time I'm going to take this file here, open it up in something that allows me to edit that photograph, and do a fairly tight crop on the two faces there and save that file. So now you can see that rather than being dated the 1st of April, this file is now dated today at 12:20, the current time. So let's go back to the job monitor and run the sync again, and this time remember that we have the option to retain previous versions switched on. So now, whilst our one file is being copied across, the changed cropped file, we should also be retaining the previous version of that file in the versions folder. So let's go take a look and see how that works. So now you can see that my cropped version of the file has been copied across and is in the position in the folder where you would expect it to be. And in the versions folder, we have the previous version of the file without the crop on it. So you can see that we have both copied the new version of the file and retained the previous version of the file, and that will continue. So whilst that file is being modified in the source folder over here, then each time the sync plan runs, it'll copy the latest version of that changed file across while retaining some number of previous versions, and that number of versions that's being retained is defined in the additional options of the sync plan. So if we look to the additional options, the Synchronize options panel here, you can see that the file versions is set to 4. So this means that 4 previous versions of files will be kept in addition to the current version of the file. Within this same window, you can also choose whether we copy or move the files. Copy is the default, but it's also possible to move files from a source to a destination folder. And the cross mount points menu determines whether or not, if we reach a folder which is a mount point to a remote disk, whether we'll start to synchronize that remote disk as well. Down at the bottom here you can see that there are similar options for generation of cycles, where you can choose the number of cycles to keep, and also whether or not the cycles are created by creating file system links, as I explained, or whether you would sooner have the sync plan copy the files and use additional disk space. So if we go back to the general setup of the plan, there's a couple of options actually within the Synchronize event that I want to show you. If we look at the additional options within the schedule event, there's a simple choice of two options here, and when we are synchronizing, so when we were synchronizing this sample pics folder to the folder on the remote machine down here, we were comparing every picture between those two machines and looking at the creation date and the file name and the file size and various different things to determine if each of those files was in any way different and therefore needed to be copied across again. And that's called scanning the file system, and that's the default for any sync event that you create. And if you just read the tooltip information here, it says that this is the most reliable way to find the changes. So that's the advantage of scanning the file system, but the disadvantage is that it can take a long time, because if you had a folder with 3 million files in it, then to compare 3 million files folder by folder and transmit over the network the changes does take some time and requires some resources. So there's an alternative to this, which is to use file system events. Now, file system events uses an operating system service which tracks changes on the file system and provides the ability for us to query it and ask for a list of folders where changes occurred since a given point in time. So if we know that this sync plan hasn't run for 2 hours, then we will query the OS and say where have changes occurred in the last 2 hours, and we'll get a list back from a log, and then we can just visit those folders to determine where the changes have taken place, rather than having to scan the whole folder tree, assuming that there's a folder tree that we've been synchronizing. So as you can see from the tooltip here, this relies on the operating system supporting it, and I believe that this runs and works with OS 10 and Windows currently. And it means that the location of changes is much quicker, but the disadvantage is that you're relying on the OS service, and on the Mac it's called File System Events, FS Events, as you can see here. And if the operating system service is very busy and doesn't track all the changes, then you might not receive all the folders where changes have taken place, and therefore you might not be synchronizing all the change data. But if you want to be able to sync a fairly large file set at a fairly small interval, like an hour or 2 hours, then you probably need to use the file system events mechanism in order that that sync can run and complete pretty quickly, and doesn't keep running for a long period of time, and that meaning that during the working day your file server is spending a lot of its time synchronizing data, and the performance is going to be degraded because of those so many tasks running. So normally what we would recommend is that you run with file system events during the working day when you need sync events to be completing quickly, and then in order to deal with the possibility that some changes might not have been noticed, run another sync in the evening when the machine isn't under load using the scanning file system mechanism, and then you know that you're going to capture all of the changes, at least on a daily basis. Okay, so that's how we do a synchronize from one folder to another folder on different machines using the update mechanism, and also how we keep previous file versions and track those versions and choose how many versions we want to keep. So let's have a look now at mirror. So if we choose mirror but don't choose to keep any previous snapshots and apply that change to the sync plan, what I'm going to do is, on my source folder, I'm going to delete all of these files here, so that the first file in the list is going to be 2070. So they've all gone from the source folder, but currently they still exist on the destinations folder. So if we ignore the versions folder, these files here still exist. So if we run our sync plan event now with the mode set to mirror, by choosing to start now and then monitoring that job as it runs, you'll see that the job completed, and over here the destination folder now matches the source and starts with the file 2070. Okay, so now we have a sync event which is deleting files and therefore only using as much space as the sample pictures folder uses on the source, only using that much space on the destination by not keeping deleted and changed files. So if we go back to our sync plan and we go back to this mirror event and we enable keep previous data as snapshot and apply that change, and then we run our sync plan. Actually, before I run it, let's make another change to the source folder. So let's delete the first 10 files or so from here, so that on our source the first file is 2080, and see how that's reflected on the target folder once we've run the sync plan in mirror mode but with keeping cycles. So let's say start now, and let's have a look at the job monitor. Got lots of windows open here. So the job monitor is running and it should be creating a cycle for us. So yes, if I look at the target folder, you can see now that those 10 files starting 207 have been deleted. So the source and the destination data now match, but there's a cycles folder here, and within the cycles folder we can see a timestamp folder, and this folder basically contains a copy of the source data on the 1st of July at 12:32 p.m. And if we look in this folder, we'll see that those files that existed at that point in time still exist in this folder, and we could continue to make changes, and the cycles would build up until there are 4 cycles, because that's the default number that we keep, and then the oldest cycle will get removed. So this basically allows you to track this sample pics folder here through time as new cycles are created each time the sync plan runs, and those cycles are clearly dated so you can see what was in that folder at those points in time. So if you have a folder which is a very critical piece of work being created and updated, this would allow you to track changes within that folder through time in a very precise way, so that you can roll the folder back to a previous point in time. And as said earlier, the additional space required to store these snapshots doesn't mean that if we take this folder, I think it was about 10 megabytes in size, so the additional cycles folders do not require an additional 10 megabytes on disk, because this file here, 2080.jpg, that also appears in this snapshot here, is not using additional space on disk. They're actually the same data on the disk, but there are 2 files in the file system that point to that data, and that's called a hard link, and that's what we're using. And actually that's what Time Machine also uses on a Mac to perform backups to external disks without using up the entire size of your hard disk up on the disk each time it runs. So let's close a few things down. That's how a sync plan runs in mirror mode, and that's how it looks when you're tracking versions. So you can create more than one event. So I could say maybe that during the week, in fact, let's go back. Let's take this event here, which runs between 9 and 7 p.m. on weekdays, and say on weekdays we just want to run update syncs and apply that. But we're going to add an additional event that just does a mirror weekly on a Saturday at 7 in the morning, and apply that. And now we have 2 schedules in our sync plan, one which is performing updates and not doing any deletes during the week, so that users could go to the target disks to recover deleted files, and then at the weekend the mirror sync runs, which will basically make the target and the source the same as each other again. So that means that each weekend the disk space required on the target will not be any greater than what's required on the source. So you're not tracking and keeping deleted files over a long period of time, which could result in filling up the disk or using more space than anticipated on the target. Okay, so that was how we do a synchronization between two machines across a LAN or a wide area network. It's also possible to use Synchronize to access cloud storage. And cloud storage means using Amazon S3, Google Drive type storage, and there are some supported at the moment, and the list is going to grow. And this means that you can pay an external provider to host your a folder where you can copy data, and you can use a sync plan to manage that process for you, just the same as you just saw using machines on the LAN. So in order to use cloud storage, you can see it's currently grayed out, we need to install something called WingFS. And to get WingFS, we go to archiware.com. And WingFS is a free utility which allows you to access and mount cloud storage from different providers on the desktop, just as if it's a local disk. So if we go to the download page on archiware.com and you scroll down to the bottom, you can see WingFS is available here, and it's a free download, so you don't need to be an Archiware customer to get the benefits of what this offers. And the download gives us a DMG file on the Mac. This currently is only supported on the Mac, and the DMG has an uninstaller, an unsigned and a signed package installer, depending on which version of Mac OS X you're using. So let's run the WingFS installer and click through and install. Installation was successful. It's only a small piece of software. Then if we search for WingFS and run the program, it's pretty simple. What it does is it allows you to configure any one of these cloud storage services such that it can be mounted on the desktop. Now, not all of these cloud storage services are available currently for configuring in a sync plan here. So if we restart Archiware, the cloud storage section will become available to configure, and we'll be able to see which services are supported in there. Now, the idea with the WingFS download for non-Archiware customers is that you can use this interface to enter either your Amazon S3 credentials or your Dropbox credentials or your Google Drive credentials, and have that mounted on the desktop just like a disk, so you can drag files in and out of it. Now, if you're using P5, then you're able to configure some of these services directly within the P5 interface, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to quit WingFS, and I'm going to use the Archiware P5 System Preference Panel to stop and then restart Archiware P5. So that should be starting up, and if I refresh my browser window a couple of times, I should get the login prompt back once it's started up. There we go. So let's log back in. And now if we go to Synchronize, you can see cloud storage is now available to be configured. So we can now go to New at the bottom and set something up. Now I have an S3 Amazon account, and so I'm going to use that to show you how this works. These credentials will be provided to you and known to you once you've set one of these accounts up. So I'm just going to copy and paste my access key into here. There they are. So if I apply those and close the window, I now have my Cloud Service 1 Amazon S3 configured in the list. And the next thing I'll do is do a connection test. So the connection test will just make that connection and establish that a sync to this remote location is going to be possible. And everything's okay. So we can now close that window, and we can now make a sync plan to sync to this remote location. Now I have got an FTP client running here, and this is also connected to my P5 Sync folder. So this is going to allow us to see what's actually been placed on the Amazon S3 bucket, as they're called, or folder, so that we can kind of test that the sync plan is behaving as we want it to. So if we go back to our Synchronize plan now, we're going to change the client, the destination of the data from our Mac Mini server to the Cloud Service 1 S3 that we just set up. Now this folder structure here will not exist in S3, so I'm going to just put a slash in the absolute path here so that I'm asking for my data from the sample pictures folder to just go into the root of what's called a bucket in Amazon S3, which is basically the same as a folder. And I'm happy to use my update Synchronize to sync this data, because currently the folder in S3 is empty, so whatever I do, all of those files need to be copied up. So let's hit start now and then monitor the job, and you can see up at the top here it's connecting to, first of all, the local machine, and we can see some files being copied across. And that'll sit there and run, copying that stuff up to the cloud. And if we go to our FTP client and update it, you can see now that what was previously an empty folder on this S3 bucket now has all of our files in. I think it's still copying the movie file. So it's just as simple to use a piece of cloud storage to create a sync plan as it is to sync between your own machines. And the number of different cloud storage providers that are available from within here is going to grow with future releases of P5. So you'll find that Amazon S3 is actually quite easy to set up an account, add a credit card, and the cost of that storage per gigabyte per month is pretty low. So you can store 100 gigabytes, for example, in the cloud for currently about £6 or £7 a month. So it's really not very expensive. Okay, so that is in essence the Synchronize module, and don't forget to visit the advanced video for some information about how file filters work, because that's something that relates to the Synch product. And thanks for watching.